I never thought a plastic shovel would turn me into the neighborhood villain. But that's exactly what happened when Patricia Henderson decided I was removing too much snow from Ridgewood Circle. My name is Keith Norwood, and I've lived in this overpriced subdivision in Greenwood Village, Colorado for 3 years. When I moved here, the realtor never mentioned that our homeowners association had a 247-page rule book covering everything from mailbox heights to the exact shade of beige your curtains could be. I learned that lesson the hard way when I got my first violation notice for planting red tulips instead of white ones in my front garden. But the snow situation, that was different. That was personal. It started on a Tuesday morning in late January. We'd gotten hammered with 14 inches of snow overnight, and the city plows had already made their rounds on the main roads by the time I woke up at 5 in the morning. I'm a contractor, and I had a job site to get to in Denver by 7, which meant I needed to clear my driveway fast. I'd invested in a serious snowblower the previous winter, a beast of a machine that could cut through the heaviest powder like it was nothing. The thing is, I didn't just clear my driveway. I cleared my elderly neighbor's driveway too. A sweet, 78-year-old widow named Margaret who lived alone and couldn't handle the physical work anymore. Then I figured, since I was already out there and the machine was running, why not do the access road that led to all 6 houses on our little cul-de-sac? It took me an extra 20 minutes, and I felt good about it. People waved from their windows, gave me thumbs up when they saw me. For 3 winters, this had been my routine, and nobody had ever complained. Until Patricia Henderson moved in. She'd purchased the house at the end of the cul-de-sac 6 months earlier, a pristine colonial with white columns that she'd immediately had repainted to an even whiter shade of white. Patricia was in her early 50s, with severely cut blonde hair that looked like she'd measured each strand with a ruler, and she wore pearls to the mailbox. Within 2 weeks of moving in, she'd gotten herself elected to the HOA board. Within a month, she was the president. The letter arrived in my mailbox on Thursday, 2 days after I'd cleared the snow. It was typed on official HOA letterhead, complete with a raised seal that probably cost 50 cents per sheet. "Dear Mr. Norwood," it began, in that fake, polite tone that these letters always used. "It has come to the attention of the Ridgewood Circle Homeowners Association Board that you have been performing unauthorized snow removal on common areas without proper approval. As per Section 47, subsection 12, paragraph 8 of the HOA bylaws, all maintenance work on common property, including but not limited to snow removal on shared roadways, must be approved in writing by the board at least 72 hours in advance. Additionally, only licensed and insured contractors approved by the HOA may perform such work. Your unauthorized snow removal activities constitute a violation of this bylaw. You are hereby fined $350. Payment is due within 15 days. Future violations will result in escalating fines of up to $1,000 per occurrence." I read the letter 3 times, certain I was misunderstanding something. They were fining me for helping my neighbors, for clearing the road that we all used. I grabbed my copy of the HOA bylaws, that massive binder they'd given me at closing that I'd barely glanced at, and flipped through until I found Section 47. Sure enough, there it was, buried in the dense legal language. But the section was clearly written with hired landscaping companies in mind, not residents trying to help each other out. I called my neighbor Tom, who lived 2 doors down and had been in the neighborhood for 12 years. "Keith, listen," Tom said, his voice tight. "Patricia pulled the same thing with me last month. I fixed a pothole in the road with some asphalt patch, and she fined me $400 for unauthorized road repair. You're kidding. I wish I was. She's on a power trip. Half the board wanted to vote her out already, but she's got dirt on them somehow. She knows everyone's business, and she's not afraid to use it. I hung up feeling like I'd stepped into some kind of suburban nightmare. But I wasn't going to pay a $350 fine for being a good neighbor. I drafted a formal appeal letter, citing that the rule was clearly intended for commercial contractors, not residents, and that I'd been performing this neighborly service for years without any complaints. I even got Margaret to write a supporting letter about how much she appreciated the help. Patricia denied my appeal within 48 hours. Her response was curt and cold. The bylaws make no distinction between commercial contractors and residents. The rule exists for liability reasons. If you injure yourself on HOA property, the association could be held responsible. Your appeal is denied. The fine stands. You have 8 days remaining to submit payment. That's when I made my decision. If they wanted to fine me for helping, then I simply wouldn't help anymore. I'd follow their ridiculous rules to the letter. The next snowfall came 5 days later on a Wednesday night. 9 inches of fresh powder blanketed everything by Thursday morning. I woke up at my usual 5 o'clock, got dressed, and went outside with my snowblower. I fired up the machine and cleared my driveway with mechanical precision. I made sure to stop exactly at the property line where my driveway met the shared road, not 1 inch beyond. Then I put the snowblower away and left for work. From my truck, I could see Margaret peering out her window, looking confused. Tom was staring at the untouched snow covering the cul-de-sac road. And at the very end of the street, Patricia's white Colonial sat smugly behind a wall of snow that the city plows had pushed into a thick berm across her driveway approach. My phone started ringing around 8 in the morning. It was Margaret. "Keith, honey, is everything all right? I saw you only did your driveway this morning." I explained the situation to her, trying to keep the bitterness out of my voice. There was a long pause on the other end. "That's the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard," Margaret said. "Patricia fined you for being kind." "That's exactly what happened." "Well, I think it's terrible, just terrible, but I understand why you can't do it anymore. Don't you worry about me, dear. My grandson said he'd come over this afternoon to help me out." Tom called next, and he was laughing. "I heard about the fine." "So you're going full malicious compliance on them, huh? Just following the rules," I said. "This is going to get interesting. Patricia drives a BMW with low clearance. No way she's getting through that snow." He was right. Over the next few days, I watched with grim satisfaction as my neighbors struggled to navigate the unplowed cul-de-sac road. Tom had a truck with 4-wheel drive, so he managed okay, though he nearly got stuck twice. Margaret's grandson came with a plow on his pickup and cleared her driveway and enough of the road for her to get out. The young couple in the third house both worked from home, so they didn't need to leave much. But Patricia was trapped. I saw her out there Thursday morning in completely inappropriate footwear, expensive leather boots with heels, trying to shovel the massive snow berm the city plow had created. She managed to clear about 3 feet before giving up. Her BMW sat uselessly in her garage for 2 days. On Saturday morning, I was having coffee in my kitchen when I saw a truck with a plow attachment pull into the cul-de-sac. It had a magnetic sign on the side that read Henderson Property Services. The truck spent 45 minutes clearing the entire road, including Patricia's driveway approach. When it finished, Patricia came out of her house, spoke briefly with the driver, and handed him what looked like cash. My phone rang that afternoon. It was Tom again. "Did you see that truck this morning, Henderson Property Services?" I said. "Yeah, I saw it." Keith, that's Patricia's brother's company. I looked it up. She hired her own brother to plow the road, and I'd bet anything the HOA is paying for it. Can she do that? Probably not legally. That's a conflict of interest, but who's going to stop her? She runs the board. I thought about that for a while. An idea was forming, but I needed to be careful. If Patricia was using HOA funds to pay her brother's company, that was fraud. But I'd need proof. The next week brought 2 more snowstorms, each dumping 6 to 8 inches. Each time, I carefully cleared only my driveway, stopping precisely at the property line. And each time, Henderson Property Services showed up a few hours later to clear the cul-de-sac road. I started taking photos, documenting the dates and times. Then I filed a formal request to review the HOA financial records. Under Colorado law, HOA members have the right to inspect financial documents. Patricia tried to deny my request at first, claiming I needed to provide a reason. I pointed out the statute that said otherwise, and she grudgingly agreed to let me review the records at the next board meeting. That meeting was on a Tuesday evening in February, held in Patricia's living room, because she'd convinced the board that renting space was an unnecessary expense. There were 5 board members total: Patricia, a retired dentist named Roger, a banker named Susan, a teacher named Michael, and a software engineer named David. They all sat on Patricia's cream-colored furniture looking uncomfortable while I stood in the doorway. "The financial records you requested," Patricia said, sliding a thin folder across her glass coffee table. I picked it up and started flipping through. The documents were sanitized, showing only general categories like snow removal services, with total amounts but no invoices or receipts. In January alone, the HOA had paid out $3,200 for snow removal. "I need to see the actual invoices," I said. "Those are confidential vendor records," Patricia replied smoothly. Under Colorado Revised Statutes Section 3833.3317, I have the right to inspect all financial records, including invoices and receipts. Roger, the retired dentist, shifted in his seat. "Patricia, he's right. We need to provide the invoices." Patricia's smile was razor thin. "Very well. I'll have them available at next month's meeting." "I'd like them within 5 business days as required by law," I said. The temperature in the room dropped about 20 degrees. Patricia stood up, her pearl necklace catching the light. "Mr. Norwood, I don't appreciate your tone. You've been nothing but a troublemaker since I joined this board. First, you violated our bylaws with unauthorized snow removal, and now you're making baseless accusations about financial impropriety." "I haven't accused anyone of anything," I said calmly. "I've simply requested documents I'm legally entitled to see." "Fine. You'll have your documents in 5 business days. Now, if there's nothing else, this meeting is adjourned." I left feeling like I'd kicked a hornet's nest, but I'd done everything by the book. Either Patricia would provide the documents and I'd find evidence of fraud, or she'd refuse and I'd have grounds to file a complaint with the state. 3 days later, I found another letter in my mailbox. This one was even more aggressive than the first. "Dear Mr. Norwood, it has come to the attention of the board that you have failed to maintain the appearance of your property in accordance with HOA standards. Specifically, your failure to clear snow from your portion of the sidewalk constitutes a violation of Section 23, subsection 4, which requires all homeowners to maintain clear and safe passage on sidewalks adjacent to their property. You are hereby fined $250. I walked outside and looked at my property. There was no sidewalk. Our cul-de-sac didn't have sidewalks. None of the houses on Ridgewood Circle had sidewalks. The nearest sidewalk was 2 streets over on Maple Drive. She was making things up now. I took photos of my property from every angle, showing clearly that there were no sidewalks. Then I drafted another appeal, this one pointing out that you can't violate a requirement for something that doesn't exist. I hand-delivered it to Patricia's house. She answered the door in a white silk blouse and dark slacks, looking like she was about to conduct a business meeting. "Mr. Norwood," she said coldly. "Appeal letter," I said, handing it to her. "And I'm still waiting for those financial documents." "You'll receive them when I'm good and ready." "That's not how the law works." Her eyes narrowed. "You know what your problem is, Keith. You don't understand how things work in a civilized community. We have rules for a reason. Without people like me enforcing those rules, neighborhoods fall apart, property values decline, chaos ensues." "I cleared snow to help my neighbors," I said. "That's not chaos, that's community. That's liability. That's unauthorized use of common property. That's someone thinking they're above the rules that everyone else has to follow." "Is that why you hired your brother's company to do the snow removal? Because you're so concerned about following rules?" The color drained from her face, then rushed back in an angry flush. "That's a slanderous accusation. It's a question, and I'll have the answer when you provide those invoices you're legally obligated to show me." She slammed the door in my face. The 5 business days came and went. No documents arrived. I sent a certified letter to the HOA board, copying all 5 members, noting that Patricia had violated state law by refusing to provide the requested financial records. I gave her 5 more days to comply before I'd file a formal complaint with the Colorado Department of Regulatory Agencies. That's when things got weird. I started getting violation notices for everything. My grass was too long, even though it was February and buried under snow. My house numbers weren't reflective enough. My mailbox was 1/4 inch too far from the curb. My garbage cans were visible from the street, despite the fact that everyone's garbage cans were visible on trash day. Each violation came with a fine ranging from $150 to $300. I was documenting everything, taking photos, measuring distances, comparing my property to my neighbor's properties. Every single violation was either fabricated or selectively enforced. Tom told me he deliberately left his garbage cans out for 2 days after my violation notice, and he received nothing. Then Margaret called me, and she was crying. "Keith, I'm so sorry, but I can't talk to you anymore. Patricia came by today and told me that if I continued associating with you, she'd report me for running an illegal home business." "What home business?" "I knit baby blankets and sell them at the church craft fair twice a year. I make maybe $200 total. Patricia says it's a commercial enterprise, and I need a special permit from the HOA that costs $5,000 annually." "Margaret, that's extortion." "I know, honey, but I can't afford a lawyer. I just can't. I'm on a fixed income. I'm so sorry." After she hung up, I sat in my living room staring at the wall. Patricia wasn't just abusing her power. She was weaponizing the HOA to bully people into submission, and she was getting away with it because most people couldn't afford to fight back. But I could. I hired a lawyer named Rachel Crane, a property attorney in Denver who specialized in HOA disputes. She was in her late 30s, sharp as a tack, and she did not like bullies. We met in her office on a Thursday afternoon, and I laid out everything that had happened. "This is textbook HOA abuse," Rachel said, flipping through my documentation. "The selective enforcement alone is actionable, but the financial records issue is the real smoking gun. If she's funneling HOA money to her brother's company without proper bidding or disclosure, that's fraud." "What's our next move?" We file a complaint with the state regulatory agency for the financial records violation. Simultaneously, we send a demand letter to the HOA board regarding the bogus fines and selective enforcement. We give them 15 days to rescind all fines and provide the financial documents, or we file a lawsuit. How much is this going to cost me? I'll do it on contingency. If we win, we recover attorney's fees from the HOA. If we lose, you're only out the filing fees, maybe a few $100s. But Keith, based on what I'm seeing here, we're not going to lose. Rachel filed the complaint with the state that afternoon. The demand letter went out the next morning via certified mail to all 5 board members. Patricia's response came within 24 hours, and it wasn't what I expected. She called an emergency HOA board meeting and voted to initiate foreclosure proceedings on my house for unpaid fines. I didn't even know that was possible until Rachel explained it to me. HOA liens are real, she said when I called her in a panic. If you don't pay your fines, they can place a lien on your property and eventually foreclose. But there are procedures they have to follow, and Patricia's jumping the gun big time. You haven't even exhausted your appeals yet, and she can't foreclose for at least 90 days after a lien is placed. She's trying to scare you. It's working. Don't let it. This actually helps our case because it shows she's acting in bad faith. Keep documenting everything. The next snowstorm hit 3 days later, a massive system that dumped 17 inches on the Front Range. It was the biggest snow of the season, and it shut down half the city. I cleared my driveway at 5 in the morning, same as always, and left the cul-de-sac road buried. Henderson Property Services didn't show up. By noon, the snow had been compacted by a few cars trying to get through, creating deep ruts and icy patches. Patricia's BMW was still stuck in her garage. I saw her standing in her driveway, staring at the impassable road, her phone pressed to her ear. Tom called me around 2 in the afternoon. The HOA just sent out an email saying they're implementing a special assessment to cover increased snow removal costs. $300 per household, due immediately. You've got to be kidding. It gets better. The email says the increased costs are due to certain residents refusing to assist with community maintenance. She's blaming me for this. Oh, it's not even subtle. She wrote some homeowners have chosen to prioritize their personal grievances over community welfare. Everyone knows she's talking about you. I forwarded the email to Rachel, who called me back within the hour. This is harassment and it's retaliatory. I'm amending our complaint to include this. Keith, I know this is stressful, but Patricia is digging her own grave here. Every action she takes just adds to our case. The state regulatory agency responded to our complaint the following week. They sent an inspector to review the HOA's financial records and conduct interviews with board members. Patricia tried to claim that I was harassing her and that my complaints were frivolous, but the inspector wasn't buying it. Mr. Norwood has made a lawful request for financial documents under Colorado statute. The inspector, a woman named Jennifer, told the board during a special meeting that I was allowed to attend. Your failure to provide those documents within the required time frame is a violation. Additionally, I've reviewed the snow removal expenses claimed by the HOA, and I need to see the actual invoices, not just summary statements. Patricia's face was red. Those are in storage. I'll need time to retrieve them. You have 48 hours, Jennifer said. If the documents aren't provided, the agency will impose penalties on the HOA and potentially on individual board members who violated their fiduciary duties. That got everyone's attention. Susan, the banker on the board, spoke up for the first time. Patricia, where are these documents? Everything should be digitized and readily available. I told you, they're in storage. What storage? All our records are supposed to be kept in the cloud storage system we set up last year. Patricia stood abruptly. I don't appreciate being interrogated like a criminal. I've volunteered countless hours to manage this association, and this is the thanks I get. Roger, the retired dentist, shook his head. Patricia just produced the invoices. What's the problem? The problem is that Keith Norwood has decided to wage a personal vendetta against me, and you're all falling for it. The state inspector isn't waging a vendetta, Michael, the teacher, said quietly. She's just doing her job, and I'd like to see these invoices too. $3,000 in 1 month seems excessive. Patricia grabbed her purse and walked out of her own living room. The remaining board members sat in awkward silence. Jennifer closed her notebook. If Miss Henderson doesn't produce the documents within 48 hours, I'll be referring this matter to the district attorney's office for investigation of potential fraud. That's when I knew Patricia was in real trouble. The 48 hours passed. No documents appeared. Jennifer kept her word and referred the case to the Denver district attorney's office. Because Greenwood Village is in Arapahoe County, the Arapahoe County DA picked it up. 2 weeks later, a detective named Chris Morrison called me. Mr. Norwood, I'm investigating financial irregularities at your homeowners association. I understand you've been documenting various incidents. Would you be willing to meet with me? We met at a coffee shop in Denver. Detective Morrison was in his early 40s, built like someone who spent serious time in the gym, with graying hair and sharp eyes that didn't miss anything. I brought every document I had: the original fine letters, the violation notices, photos, emails, the HOA bylaws with the relevant sections highlighted, and my timeline of events. He reviewed everything methodically, taking notes. "This is good work," he said. "Very organized. You've made my job easier. Let me tell you what we've found so far. Henderson Property Services has been paid $23,000 by your HOA over the past 6 months for various services. Snow removal, landscaping, minor repairs, you name it. The problem is, there's no record of competitive bidding, which is required under your HOA's own bylaws for any contract over $5,000. There's also no disclosure of the conflict of interest, even though Patricia Henderson is both the HOA president and the sister of the company owner. Is that illegal? It depends. If she disclosed the relationship and the board voted to approve it anyway, it might be acceptable, though still ethically questionable. But there's no record of any disclosure or vote. Additionally, we've found evidence that some of the invoices may be inflated or for services that were never actually performed. Like what? Like a $7,000 landscape renovation in December, in Colorado, when everything's dormant and covered in snow. I let out a low whistle. We're going to need to interview all the board members and your neighbors, Morrison continued. I'll be straight with you. This isn't a huge case in terms of dollar amounts. We're probably talking about embezzlement in the $20,000 to $30,000 range. But it's still a crime, and it affects a lot of people. The DA is taking it seriously. Over the next month, Detective Morrison interviewed everyone in the neighborhood. Margaret told him about Patricia's threats regarding her knitting. Tom described the fine he'd received for fixing the pothole. Other neighbors came forward with their own stories of selective enforcement and bullying. The young couple in the third house, Sarah and James, revealed that Patricia had threatened to fine them for having a vegetable garden in their backyard, claiming it violated some obscure rule about agricultural activities. They'd torn it out rather than fight. Another neighbor, an elderly man named Frank who lived on the opposite side of the cul-de-sac, Said Patricia had fined him for parking his vintage Corvette in his driveway instead of his garage, claiming it was an eyesore. The car was pristine and worth more than $60,000. The pattern was clear. Patricia had been using the HOA as her personal fiefdom, extracting money through bogus fines and enriching her brother through fraudulent contracts. Meanwhile, the snow kept falling. February turned into March, and Colorado's notorious late-season storms continued to dump snow across the Front Range. Each time, I cleared only my driveway. Each time, the cul-de-sac road remained impassable until either neighbors with trucks cleared it themselves or someone paid for private plowing. Henderson Property Services stopped showing up after the DA's investigation became public knowledge. Patricia's brother apparently decided that being associated with the case was bad for business. Patricia herself became increasingly isolated. She stopped attending board meetings, claiming she was too busy with personal matters. The remaining board members voted to suspend her as president pending the outcome of the investigation. Roger took over as interim president, and his first act was to rescind all the fines Patricia had issued against me and several other residents. "We're also going to vote to reimburse you for any legal expenses you incurred," Roger told me at a special board meeting in March. "What Patricia did was unconscionable. On behalf of the board, I apologize." "I appreciate that," I said. "But what about the rule prohibiting residents from clearing the common road?" The board members looked at each other. Susan spoke up. "That rule was never enforced before Patricia became president. We've reviewed the history, and for years, residents helped each other out with snow removal, minor repairs, all sorts of things. That's what neighbors do. We're going to amend the bylaws to explicitly allow residents to perform reasonable maintenance activities for the benefit of the community, as long as they're not creating safety hazards." "I'd like that in writing," I said. "You'll have it at next month's meeting," Roger promised. In late March, the district attorney's office filed formal charges against Patricia Henderson. She was charged with theft, embezzlement, forgery for creating false invoices, and a civil RICO violation for running a scheme to defraud the HOA. Her brother was also charged as a co-conspirator for knowingly billing for services not rendered. The story made the local news. A reporter from the Denver Post interviewed several neighbors and wrote a scathing article about HOA abuse and the lack of oversight for community associations. The article quoted me extensively, and I made sure to emphasize that I just wanted to help my neighbors clear snow. Patricia's arraignment was scheduled for mid-April. I didn't attend, but Rachel went and reported back. She showed up with a lawyer and pleaded not guilty. She's trying to claim that everything was a misunderstanding, that she was just trying to protect the HOA from liability. But the evidence is overwhelming. The DA has bank records, emails, text messages between her and her brother. They're going to offer her a plea deal, but if she refuses, this is going to trial. What kind of sentence is she looking at? For theft and embezzlement of this amount, probably 2 to 5 years, possibly suspended with probation and restitution if she cooperates. The RICO charge is more serious, but it's also harder to prove. My guess is they'll drop that in exchange for a guilty plea on the theft and embezzlement charges. The April snow was light, just a few inches here and there. I cleared my driveway, and with the board's written permission now in hand, I also cleared the cul-de-sac road. Margaret waved from her window. Tom gave me a thumbs up. Sarah and James brought me a homemade pie with a note that said, "Thank you for standing up to her." In early May, Patricia accepted a plea deal. She pleaded guilty to theft and embezzlement, received a 3-year suspended sentence, and was ordered to pay full restitution of $28,000 to the HOA. She also had to perform 500 hours of community service and was permanently banned from serving on any HOA board in Colorado. Her brother got probation and a smaller restitution amount. The criminal case was over, but the civil case continued. Rachel filed a lawsuit on behalf of the HOA against Patricia for breach of fiduciary duty and fraud. The HOA's insurance company also filed a subrogation claim. Between the criminal restitution and the civil judgments, Patricia was looking at significant financial consequences. She put her house up for sale in June. I saw the for sale sign go up one morning, and I felt a mix of emotions. Satisfaction that justice had been served, but also sadness that it had come to this. I genuinely believed that if Patricia had just let people be decent neighbors to each other, none of this would have happened. The house sold in 3 weeks. Patricia moved out on a Thursday afternoon. I was working in my garage when the moving truck pulled up. I watched as her belongings were loaded, box after box, piece of furniture after piece of furniture. She supervised from the driveway, wearing jeans and a plain t-shirt. No pearls. Her hair looked like she'd cut it herself. As the moving truck pulled away, she stood there for a moment, staring at the house. Then she looked down the cul-de-sac and her eyes met mine. I couldn't read her expression. Anger, regret, exhaustion. Maybe all three. She got in her BMW and drove away. I never saw her again. The new owners of her house were a young family with 2 kids and a golden retriever. They introduced themselves the day they moved in, bringing cookies and smiles. The wife, Lisa, mentioned that they'd heard about the HOA drama from their real estate agent. "We were worried at first," she said. "But then we talked to some of the neighbors, and everyone said things are much better now. We're really happy to be here." Roger stepped down as HOA president after 6 months, saying he was ready to enjoy retirement without the headaches of board politics. Susan took over, and under her leadership, the board streamlined the bylaws, eliminating hundreds of nitpicky rules and focusing on actual community maintenance and safety issues. They reduced the rule book from 247 pages to 35. The special assessment Patricia had tried to impose was canceled, and the board found enough money in reserves to handle the snow removal costs. They also established a formal volunteer program for residents who wanted to help with neighborhood maintenance, including snow removal, with clear liability waivers and guidelines. Rachel and I became friends. She'd been so impressed with how thoroughly I'd documented everything that she asked if she could use my case as a teaching example in a seminar she taught on HOA law. I agreed, and she took me to dinner to celebrate when the last of the legal matters was finally resolved in September. "You know what the crazy thing is?" she said over steaks at a restaurant in Cherry Creek. "Patricia could have just let you clear the snow. That's all it would have taken. Instead, she turned a neighborly gesture into a federal case, and it destroyed her life. You think she understands that?" Honestly, probably not. People like Patricia don't see themselves as the villain. They see themselves as the guardian of civilization, protecting order from chaos. They can't comprehend that sometimes the rules are stupid, and kindness matters more than compliance. I thought about that on the drive home. The sun was setting over the Rockies, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Summer was fading into fall, and soon enough, winter would return with its inevitable snow. Margaret passed away in October. It was peaceful, her grandson told me. She'd gone to sleep one night and simply didn't wake up. At her funeral, I learned that she'd left me something in her will, her house. She had no other family besides her grandson, who lived in California and had no interest in moving to Colorado. She'd wanted someone who cared about the neighborhood to have it. I was stunned. I didn't need another house, but I couldn't refuse the gift. After talking with her grandson and my financial advisor, I decided to rent it out to a nice young couple who were saving up for their own place. The rent covered the property taxes and maintenance, and I felt good knowing Margaret's house would continue to be a home, not just an investment property. The first snow of the new season came in early November, right before Thanksgiving. 8 inches fell overnight, and I woke up early to clear it. I did my driveway, then the shared road, then cleared the driveway of Margaret's house for the new tenants. Other neighbors were out helping too. Tom was using his truck to push snow to the side. Frank was shoveling his own driveway while Sarah and James worked on theirs together, laughing as they tossed snow at each other. This is what community was supposed to look like. I'd been nervous about my first winter without Margaret, but watching everyone work together, helping each other, I realized that her spirit was still part of the neighborhood. She'd always been the heart of our little cul-de-sac, the one who baked cookies for newcomers and checked on people during storms. In her own quiet way, she'd taught all of us what it meant to be good neighbors. December brought a white Christmas, rare for Colorado. The neighborhood kids built snowmen in their yards, and someone organized a caroling group that went door to door singing off-key but enthusiastic versions of holiday classics. I contributed terrible tenor vocals and felt ridiculously happy doing it. In January, a year after the whole mess had started, I got a letter in the mail. Not from the HOA, but from Patricia. It had been forwarded through her lawyer, and Rachel advised me not to respond, but I opened it anyway. The letter was handwritten, not typed on fancy letterhead. Her handwriting was shaky. "Keith," it began, "I don't expect you to forgive me, and I'm not asking for your sympathy. I'm writing because my therapist suggested I make amends to the people I've hurt. You were right about all of it. I was on a power trip, and I used the HOA to control people because I couldn't control my own life. My marriage had just fallen apart when I moved to Colorado. I was angry and lost, and I took it out on everyone around me. What I did to you and the other neighbors was wrong. The fraud was wrong. All of it was wrong. I've lost everything. My reputation, my savings, my freedom in many ways. But I'm in therapy now, and I'm trying to understand why I became the person I became. I hope you and the neighbors are well. I hope someone is helping Margaret with the snow. She's a good person who deserves kindness. I'm sorry I forgot what that looked like. Patricia." I read the letter twice, then folded it and put it in a drawer. I didn't frame it or burn it or respond to it. It was just a letter, words on paper, an acknowledgement of harm done. It didn't change the past, but maybe it meant Patricia was finally taking responsibility for her actions. That felt like enough. February brought more snow, as it always did. I'd settled into a comfortable routine. Wake up early, clear the snow, help the neighbors, go to work. Simple acts of community maintenance that never should have been controversial in the first place. One morning, while I was clearing the road, the new family's golden retriever escaped from their house and came bounding through the snow toward me, tail wagging like a helicopter blade. The dog jumped up, putting snowy paws on my jacket, and licked my face with enthusiastic affection. Lisa came running out in her bathrobe, apologizing profusely. "I'm so sorry. He loves snow and he loves people and he has absolutely no manners." I laughed, scratching the dog behind the ears. "It's fine. What's his name?" "Murphy. He's a menace, but we adore him." Murphy became a regular fixture during my snow-clearing sessions after that. He'd bound through the drifts, chase the snow I was blowing, and generally make the whole task more entertaining. Other neighbors started timing their morning coffee to watch Murphy's antics. In March, The HOA board voted to formally recognize my volunteer work with a plaque, which was embarrassing but sweet. They mounted it on a post at the entrance to the cul-de-sac. It read, "In appreciation of Keith Norwood, whose dedication to helping his neighbors exemplifies the true spirit of community." Tom joked that I should invoice them for the snow blowing, just to make sure I'd come full circle. I told him I'd rather eat my snow shovel. Spring arrived slowly, as it does in Colorado. The snow melted in fits and starts, revealing the dead grass and accumulated debris of winter. The neighborhood organized a cleanup day and everyone pitched in, raking, trimming, planting flowers. We worked together for hours, and someone set up a grill for burgers and hot dogs afterward. Standing in Tom's backyard that afternoon, eating a slightly burnt hamburger and listening to neighbors laugh and chat, I realized how much had changed in a year. We'd gone from being strangers who happened to live near each other to being an actual community. Patricia's tyranny had inadvertently brought us together, unified by shared frustration and eventually shared purpose. I thought about all the hours I'd spent documenting violations, meeting with lawyers, talking to detectives. It had been exhausting and stressful, and there were moments when I wanted to just pay the stupid fines and move on. But I hadn't, and because of that, the neighborhood was better. The HOA was better. People felt free to help each other without fear of arbitrary punishment. In May, I got a call from Rachel. "I thought you'd want to know that Patricia's civil case finally settled. The insurance company recovered most of what they paid out, and the HOA is whole again financially. That chapter is officially closed." "Good," I said. "That's really good. You did something important, Keith. You stood up to a bully when most people would have just rolled over. You should be proud." After we hung up, I went outside and looked at the mountains. The peaks were still capped with snow, brilliant white against the blue sky. In a few months, that snow would melt and feed the rivers that sustain the state. In a few more months, new snow would fall, and the cycle would begin again. I thought about Margaret, who taught me that being a good neighbor wasn't about following rules, but about seeing what needed to be done and doing it. I thought about Patricia, who'd become so obsessed with control that she'd forgotten the purpose of rules in the first place. And I thought about all the people on Ridgewood Circle who'd found their voices and their community through the whole ordeal. My snow shovel and blower sat in the garage, waiting for next winter. When the time came, I'd use them. Not because a rule required it or permitted it, but because it was the right thing to do, because that's what neighbors do for each other. And no one, not Patricia Henderson or any other petty tyrant in pearls, could fine me for that anymore. The following summer was quiet in the best possible way. The HOA board met quarterly instead of monthly and handled actual business in under an hour. Susan proved to be an excellent president, focusing on maintaining common areas and organizing neighborhood events rather than policing everyone's curtain colors. We had a 4th of July block party that drew nearly every resident of Ridgewood Circle. Tom organized a cornhole tournament. Lisa and her husband grilled dozens of burgers. Kids ran around with sparklers while adults sat in lawn chairs and talked about nothing important. It was perfect. Frank brought his vintage Corvette out and let kids sit in the driver's seat for photos, their faces glowing with excitement. No one mentioned that Patricia had once tried to ban the car from driveways. It seemed like a distant memory from another era. In August, a couple thinking about buying a house in the neighborhood knocked on my door and asked what it was like to live here. Apparently, their real estate agent had mentioned the HOA drama, and they were nervous. I invited them in for coffee and told them the whole story, not pulling any punches about how bad it had gotten, but emphasizing how the community had come together to fix it. So the HOA is good now? The husband asked. The HOA is what we make it, I said. It took a crisis to remind everyone that these associations are supposed to serve the residents, not control them. As long as people stay engaged and don't let power-hungry individuals take over, it works fine. They bought a house 2 streets over and became part of the broader neighborhood community. I saw them at the fall harvest party, helping to set up tables and carrying pumpkins for the decorating contest. Winter returned in November, as reliable as taxes and traffic. The first snow was light, just 3 inches, barely worth the effort of clearing. But I did it anyway, out of habit, and because it was still easier to clear fresh powder than compacted ice. Murphy, the golden retriever, appeared as soon as I fired up the snowblower, his tail wagging with pure joy. He'd grown since I first met him, bigger and goofier, still completely lacking in manners but full of love. I cleared the road while Murphy bounded alongside me, and I thought about how this simple act had become the center of so much conflict and ultimately so much growth. December brought a Christmas market organized by the HOA, held in the community green space that Patricia had always wanted to keep pristine and unused. Vendors sold handmade crafts, baked goods, and hot chocolate. Margaret would have loved it. I bought a hand-knitted scarf from an elderly woman who reminded me of her, and I wore it every cold day after that. The new year arrived with a massive snowstorm that shut down the entire Denver metro area for 2 days. This time, when I went out to clear snow, I wasn't alone. Tom was there with his truck. Frank had a shovel. Sarah and James were clearing their driveway. Lisa's husband was helping. Even the teenagers from 3 houses down came out to help, drawn by the promise of $50 and hot chocolate. We worked together for hours, clearing not just the cul-de-sac, but the entire section of road leading to the main street. Cars got unstuck. Driveways became passable. Neighbors who'd been trapped got out for essential errands. When we finished, we stood in Tom's garage drinking coffee and warming our hands, exhausted and satisfied. Someone told a joke about starting our own snow removal company and undercutting Henderson Property Services. Everyone laughed. This was what Patricia had tried to prevent with her rules and fines and obsessive control. This moment of people helping each other, connected by effort and purpose, and simple human decency. She'd seen liability and disorder where there was actually just community finding its best self. I went home that afternoon feeling more at peace than I had in years. The legal battles were over. The drama had faded. What remained was the quiet satisfaction of living in a place where people looked out for each other, where helping your neighbor wasn't a violation but a virtue. The plaque at the entrance to the cul-de-sac had weathered the winter, its words still clear despite the snow and ice. Every time I drove past it, I felt a little embarrassed but also grateful. Not for the recognition, but for the reminder that standing up for what was right had mattered. In February, I got an email from the state regulatory agency. They were conducting a study on HOA oversight and reform, and they wanted to interview me about my experience. I agreed and spent an hour on a video call with a legislative aide, explaining everything that had happened and offering suggestions for how to prevent similar abuses. One of the biggest problems is that most people don't know their rights, I told her. They get a fine or a violation notice, and they just pay it because they assume the HOA has absolute authority. There needs to be better education for homeowners about what HOAs can and can't do, and there needs to be easier, cheaper ways to challenge abuse without having to hire a lawyer. That's very helpful, she said, taking notes. Would you be willing to testify if we hold hearings on HOA reform legislation? Absolutely. I never got called to testify. The legislative session ended without action on HOA reform. But I'd done what I could, and maybe the study would lead to changes down the road. Sometimes progress was slow, incremental, frustrating. But it was still progress. March brought the kind of weather that made you remember why people lived in Colorado despite the brutal winters. Sunny days with temperatures in the 60s, snow melting fast, crocuses pushing up through the last patches of ice. The mountains were spectacular, their peaks sharp against impossibly blue skies. I spent a Saturday hiking in the foothills with Tom and his wife, taking in views that stretched for miles. We didn't talk about HOAs or snow or any of the drama. We talked about sports and travel and where to find the best green chili in Denver. Normal stuff. Friend stuff. On the hike down, Tom said something that stuck with me. You know, before all this happened with Patricia, I didn't really know most of my neighbors. I'd wave, maybe chat for 30 seconds about the weather, but that was it. Now I actually know these people. We help each other. We have cookouts. My kids play with their kids. It's good. Yeah, I said. It is good. So in a weird way, Patricia did us a favor. She was terrible, don't get me wrong. But she forced us to pay attention, to get involved, to actually build a community instead of just living in proximity to each other. I thought about that for a while. It was true in a twisted way. Patricia's abuse had been the catalyst for positive change, though obviously not in the way she'd intended. Her downfall had created space for something better to grow, but I wouldn't thank her for it. The cost had been too high. Margaret had been threatened. Neighbors had been bullied. Money had been stolen. Patricia herself had destroyed her life chasing power she didn't know how to use responsibly. There had to be better ways to build community than through conflict and crisis. Still, I couldn't change what had happened. I could only appreciate what had emerged from it. A neighborhood that actually functioned like a neighborhood. An HOA that served its residents instead of oppressing them. And a group of people who'd learned that standing together against abuse was worth the effort. Spring fully arrived in April, bringing green grass and blooming trees, and the kind of weather that made you want to spend every moment outside. The HOA organized a neighborhood yard sale, and people dragged their unwanted stuff to the community green space for a day of bargain hunting and socializing. I sold an old lawnmower and some tools I never used. I bought a vintage record player from Frank, who was downsizing and getting rid of things he no longer needed. We haggled for about 30 seconds before agreeing on $15, and then we stood around talking about cars and grandchildren and the Broncos' prospects for next season. This was the life Patricia had moved to Colorado to find, I realized. Connection, community. A fresh start after her divorce. But she'd been so damaged, so desperate for control, that she'd poisoned the well before she could drink from it. She tried to force people to respect her authority instead of earning their respect through kindness and collaboration. I wondered where she was now. Back east somewhere, according to a neighbor who'd heard through the real estate grapevine. Starting over in a place where no one knew her story. I hoped she was getting the help she needed. I hoped her therapist was good. I hoped she'd learned something from the whole disaster. But mostly, I just hoped she stayed away from HOA boards. The summer passed in a blur of work projects and weekend adventures. I took a week off in July and drove up to Rocky Mountain National Park, hiking trails I'd been meaning to explore for years. The mountains were full of wildflowers, and the alpine lakes reflected the peaks in perfect mirror images. It was exactly what I needed to clear my head and reset. When I got back, there was a message from Rachel on my phone. "Keith, call me when you get a chance. Nothing urgent, just wanted to update you on something." I called her that evening from my back deck, watching the sun set over the foothills. So I got a call from a HOA in Aurora, Rachel said. They're dealing with a board president who's even worse than Patricia, if you can believe it. Guy's been embezzling money, threatening residents, the whole 9 yards. They asked if you'd be willing to talk to them about how you organized your case and stood up to your board. Really? Yeah. I told them I'd ask. No pressure, but I think your experience could really help these people. They're terrified of this guy. I thought about it. Did I really want to get involved in someone else's HOA nightmare? Part of me wanted to say no, to protect my own peace and avoid reliving the stress of that period. But another part of me remembered how alone I'd felt when Patricia first started targeting me. How valuable it would have been to talk to someone who'd been through it and come out the other side. Okay, I said. Give them my number. I'll talk to them. Over the next few weeks, I had several conversations with residents of the Aurora HOA, sharing what I'd learned about documentation, legal rights, and how to organize a community response to board abuse. I introduced them to Rachel, who agreed to take their case. Last I heard, they were making progress, and the corrupt board president was on his way out. It felt good to help. It felt like Margaret's legacy living on through me. That spirit of looking out for your neighbors and standing up for what's right. Fall came with its brilliant display of changing aspen leaves, the mountainsides turning gold and orange. The neighborhood organized a hiking trip to see the colors, and nearly 20 people showed up. We carpooled to Kenosha Pass and spent the day walking among the aspens, taking photos, breathing in the crisp autumn air. On the drive back, squished in the back seat of Tom's SUV next to Lisa and Sarah, I listened to everyone chat and laugh, sharing stories and making plans for the upcoming holidays. These were my people now, my community, my friends. Not because a HOA board had decreed it, but because we'd chosen to be there for each other. The first snow of the season came early that year in mid-October. Just a dusting, barely an inch, but enough to remind us that winter was coming. I cleared my driveway more out of habit than necessity, and Murphy came bounding over to play in the powder, his golden fur covered in white flakes. November brought a real storm, 10 inches that blanketed everything. I was up at 5 as always, snowblower roaring to life in the pre-dawn darkness. The work was meditative now, repetitive and purposeful. Clear the driveway, clear the road, help the neighbors. Simple acts of service that didn't require recognition or reward. By the time the sun came up, the entire cul-de-sac was clear. Smoke rose from chimneys as people made their morning coffee. Lights clicked on in windows as families began their days. I stood in the middle of the road, surrounded by neat banks of snow, and felt completely content. This was enough. This was everything. Patricia Henderson had taught me something valuable, though not in the way she'd intended. She taught me that rules without humanity became tyranny, that power without accountability became abuse, and that the only real antidote to both was a community willing to stand together and say enough. She'd also taught me, though again not intentionally, that the simple act of shoveling snow could be revolutionary. That helping your neighbors could be an act of resistance against pettiness and control. That kindness mattered more than compliance, and that sometimes the most important thing you could do was just show up with a shovel when it snowed. I put the snowblower away and went inside to make coffee. Through the kitchen window, I watched Tom emerge from his house with a shovel to clear his front walk. Frank came out with a broom to sweep his steps. Sarah and James worked together on their driveway, laughing about something I couldn't hear. My phone buzzed with a text from the neighborhood group chat. It was Susan, the HOA president. "Thanks, Keith, for clearing the road this morning. You're a legend." Other texts followed, echoing the sentiment, adding coffee cup emojis and snowflake gifs. I smiled and put the phone down. The recognition was nice, but it wasn't why I did it. I did it because it needed doing. Because that's what neighbors do. Because Margaret had shown me the way forward and Patricia had shown me why it mattered. And because every time it snowed, I had a choice. I could follow rules designed to limit and control, or I could follow the better rule, the simpler one, the one that Margaret had lived by her whole life. Help when you can, give when you're able, and never let arbitrary authority stop you from being kind. The snow kept falling outside my window, adding to the accumulation, but the roads were clear and the neighbors were safe and warm. That was enough. That was everything. That was community. And no HOA president, no matter how tyrannical or pearl-clutching or desperate for control, could ever find me for that again.